At the $3 million hearing, my sister laughed in my face. "You can't even live alone. How are you supposed to manage a fortune?" My parents nodded, already tasting the victory of taking my money and stripping me of my rights. They thought I was just a girl with autism, an easy target. They didn't know that for 3 years, I'd been leading a double life, hiding a secret weapon in my closet that would turn their triumph into a total catastrophe. When the judge asked for my lawyer's name, I stood up and said just 5 words that turned my mother's face gray. The courtroom door in Mesa County was heavier than any door had a right to be. I leaned into it with my shoulder pushing through the weight and stepped inside. I wore the only charcoal suit I owned that wasn't wrinkled, my left hand gripping a briefcase while my pulse hammered against my collarbone. "My name is Maya Thorne." The petitioner's side of the room was crowded. My parents sat dead center, arms folded with an air of practiced authority, as if they already owned my future. My sister, Sloane, sat beside them with her husband, her lips curled in that familiar, sharp half-smirk. My 19-year-old brother, Caleb, stared at his shoes, looking as though he wished the floor would simply open up and swallow him. Their lawyer sat at the head of the table, tapping an expensive fountain pen and grinning, as if this hearing were nothing more than a chore before the inevitable victory. Sloane leaned forward, her voice carrying easily across the gallery. "You can't even live alone, Maya. How are you supposed to manage a fortune?" My mother let out a soft, pitying sigh, a sound she had perfected over 20 years. My father just shook his head slowly, the way one looks at something too broken to be saved. "All rise," the bailiff called. The judge was an older woman with silver hair pulled into a tight, uncompromising knot. Her eyes were sharp as they scanned the file. "Counsel for the respondent, Maya Thorne?" she asked. I stood up. My voice was surprisingly steady. "Your Honor, I am Maya Thorne, and I am representing myself." The silence that followed was absolute. The lawyer's pen clattered to the floor. Sloane's smirk vanished. My mother's mouth parted in genuine shock, and my father's face turned a deep, bruised purple. Only Caleb looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and wide. They had walked into this courtroom thinking a $3 million trust was an easy target. They had no idea who they were dealing with. To understand why I was standing there alone, you have to go back to when I was 8 years old, living on the outskirts of Grand Junction. The doctors had labeled me as being on the spectrum in the early 2000s. My mother had noticed I never joined the other children at parties, preferring to spend my time lining up Caleb's toy trucks by weight and wheel diameter. I could read a complex ledger before I could ride a bike, but eye contact felt like staring directly into a midday sun. Instead of helping me navigate the world, my parents sent me 40 miles away to a specialized school in the valley. Meanwhile, Sloane stayed in town, the star of the varsity track team, her face in the local paper every other month. At home, dinner was a monologue about her latest meet, or her perfect GPA. I sat in silence, counting the knots in the pine ceiling, so I wouldn't have to see the disappointment in my parents' eyes. The only person who never looked at me like a broken machine was my grandfather, Arthur Sterling. Every Friday, he'd pull up in his dusty red pickup, honk twice, and I'd be out the door with my bags before the engine stopped vibrating. We would drive out to his ranch in the high desert, windows down, and the radio lost to the wind. He taught me the reality of the land, how to read grazing leases, how to tell if a tenant was underreporting their head count, and how to build a paper trail so airtight that no one could ever slip through the cracks. "Maya," he'd say, handing me a fresh leather-bound book. "The world is going to spend your whole life trying to convince you that you aren't capable. Don't you ever believe them." He made me initial every page we finished together. When I was 12, he set me down at the heavy oak kitchen table, poured me a cup of bitter black coffee, and slid a thick stack of documents toward me. It was an irrevocable trust. He had taken out a significant life insurance policy and rolled his entire 1,200-acre estate into it. I was the sole beneficiary. No co-trustees, no board of directors, no family vote. Just me. He tapped the signature line with a weathered finger. This is yours, kid. Nobody touches it but you. He passed away 9 years later on a Tuesday in September, sitting in his favorite chair, watching the weather report. The reading of the will took place in a cramped office in the city. The attorney began with the minor bequests. Sloane received the cabin in the mountains, my parents received the retirement accounts. Then he turned the page. And to my granddaughter, Maya Thorne, I leave the entirety of the Arthur Sterling Irrevocable Trust, currently valued at $3.6 million, consisting of the life insurance proceeds, and the deeded ranch lands currently under lease. The air in the room seemed to vanish. I remember my mother's hand tightening around my father's until her knuckles were white as bone. I remember the way Sloane's head snapped toward me, her heavy earrings swinging like a pendulum. I saw the look on my mother's face, shock, followed by something cold and calculating. My father cleared his throat to object, but the attorney kept reading. Arthur had included an in terrorem clause. Any beneficiary who challenged another's share would forfeit everything they owned. My mother's grip loosened. She forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. That was the moment the temperature changed. Nobody hugged me on the way out. In the parking lot, I heard Sloane mutter that Grandpa must have just felt sorry for the helpless one. I drove home in my aging sedan, the radio off, trying to process the fact that the only man who truly saw me had just handed me a life my family was already plotting to steal. My phone buzzed incessantly with notifications from a family group chat I was rarely invited to. Finally, a message from my mother popped up. Dinner at Sloane's tonight. 7 p.m. We need to talk. I arrived at their house in a new subdivision, all beige stone and oversized garages. Sloane opened the door and gave me a brief, clinical hug before ushering me into the living room. A man named Marcus Thorne, a family associate with shiny loafers and a thick folder, was already seated on the leather sofa. My father sat in his recliner, nursing a drink. My mother hovered by the kitchen island, pouring wine for everyone but me. Caleb was hunched over on a stool, staring at his phone with his earbuds in, pretending the room didn't exist. Sloane handed me a bottle of water and slid a 22-page document across the table. It's a family protection agreement, she said, as if she were doing me a favor. I flipped it open. The legal jargon was dense, but the core was simple. I was to transfer the trust into a joint account. My parents and Sloane would act as co-trustees with unanimous voting rights. I would be granted a monthly allowance of $2,000 for living expenses. On page 5, the justification was written in bold. Whereas Maya Thorne has been diagnosed with developmental disorders, the family maintains concerns regarding her capacity for independent financial management. The heat rose in my neck. Sloane folded her arms. Just sign it, Maya. Don't make this difficult. My mother stepped closer, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. Sweetie, we're just trying to protect you. Big money is overwhelming for someone like you. I looked at my father, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. Marcus Thorne leaned forward, his gold watch glinting under the lights. If you don't sign tonight, we file for guardianship in the district court within 72 hours. Once that's granted, you won't even have the authority to open a checking account. It's your choice. The room fell silent. I stared at the signature lines. My name was already highlighted in yellow, waiting for me to surrender. Caleb pulled one earbud out, looking at me with a pained expression. I closed the folder. I'm not signing anything. My mother's mask slipped. Maya, be reasonable. No, I said, my voice cutting through her tone. My grandfather made this trust irrevocable for a reason. He wanted me to have control. Not you. My father finally spoke, his voice low and gravelly. He didn't understand how limited you really are, Maya. The words felt like a physical blow. I stood up, taking the folder with me. Marcus Thorne shrugged. The clock is ticking. 72 hours. I walked to the front door without looking back. As I stepped into the cold night air, I heard Sloane's voice hiss behind me. Let her go. She'll come crawling back when she realizes she can't survive on her own. I got into my car, placed the unsigned agreement on the passenger seat, and drove home with my hands shaking on the wheel. That night, I sat at my small kitchen table and read every word of their proposal again. It wasn't just about control, it was a character assassination. They had attached my childhood school records, a decade-old psychologist's report, and even a photo of me at 14 wearing noise-canceling headphones at a party, labeled as evidence of social deficit. I photographed every page, uploaded them to a secure drive, and went to bed with the lights on. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls. I didn't answer. Instead, I opened my laptop and began researching state statutes on guardianship. I printed the forms they would use, highlighted the requirements for clear and convincing evidence, and looked up every case where an adult had successfully fought back. They weren't bluffing. But neither was I. That was the exact moment the temperature in the room shifted. I felt it against my skin like stepping from the deep shade of a canyon into the sudden, unforgiving Colorado sun. They didn't offer a hug on the way out. No one said a word of congratulations. In the parking lot, Sloane's voice carried through the thin air, sharp enough for the receptionist to hear. I guess Grandpa just felt sorry for her, she muttered. My mother shushed her, but the words had already landed. The damage was done. I drove home alone in my battered sedan, windows rolled up for once and the radio silenced. I tried to process the reality. The only person who had ever truly seen me had just handed me a fortune that most people in this part of the state wouldn't touch in 3 lifetimes. And already, my own blood was calculating the best way to bleed me dry. My phone buzzed incessantly, notifications from a family group chat I was rarely included in. A message from my mother popped up first, 7 p.m. tonight at Sloane's. We all need to talk. I pulled into the driveway of the new subdivision south of the city, a place defined by 3-car garages and faux stone facades. Their Christmas lights were already strung up, despite the fact that Thanksgiving had barely passed. Sloane opened the door wearing yoga pants and a fleece pullover. She gave me a quick hug that felt more like a pat-down before steering me toward the living room. Marcus Thorne was already anchored to the leather sectional, his shiny loafers crossed, and a thick folder spread open on the coffee table, as if he held the deed to the house. My father sat in his recliner, nursing a drink. My mother hovered near the kitchen island, pouring red wine into stemless glasses for everyone but me. Caleb was slouched on an ottoman, scrolling through his phone with his earbuds in, desperately pretending he was somewhere else. Sloane handed me a bottle of water, the cap still sealed, and slid a 22-page document across the marble. The family protection agreement, she announced, her tone implying it was a gift. I flipped it open. Page after page of dense legalese sat before me, but the core of it was devastatingly simple. I was to immediately transfer the entirety of the irrevocable trust into a new joint account. My mother, my father, and Sloane would serve as co-trustees with unanimous voting rights. I would be granted a monthly allowance of $2,500 for living expenses. The justification was printed in bold on page 5. Whereas Maya Thorne has been diagnosed with a developmental disorder, the family maintains significant concerns regarding her capacity for independent financial management. I felt the heat crawl up the back of my neck. Sloane folded her arms, her gaze fixed on me. Just sign it, Maya. Don't make this harder than it has to be. My mother stepped closer, her voice turning syrupy. Sweetie, we're only trying to protect you. You know how overwhelming that kind of money can be. I looked at my father. He wouldn't meet my eyes, opting instead for another long pull from his glass. Marcus Thorne leaned forward, the gold on his watch flashing under the recessed lighting. If you choose not to sign tonight, we will file a petition for guardianship in the district court within 72 hours, he said. Once that petition is granted, you won't have authority over so much as a checking account. It's your call. The room went quiet, save for the low hum of the designer refrigerator. I stared at the signature page. 3 blank lines waited for Patricia Thorne, Stephen Thorne, and Sloane Mitchell. My line sat beneath them, already highlighted in a bright, mocking yellow. Caleb finally pulled one earbud out. "Can we just eat?" he muttered. Sloane shot him a look sharp enough to cut glass. I closed the folder. "I'm not signing anything." My mother's rehearsed smile cracked. "Maya, be reasonable." "No," I cut her off, my voice calm but loud enough to echo against the vaulted ceiling. "Grandpa made the trust irrevocable for a reason. He wanted me to have control. Not you." My father finally spoke, his voice low and gravelly. "He didn't understand how bad it really is with you, Maya." The words landed like a physical blow. I stood up, the folder gripped in my hand. Marcus Thorne simply shrugged. "The clock is ticking. 72 hours. I walked to the front door. No one followed. As I stepped onto the porch, the cold mountain night hit my face. Behind me, I heard Sloane's hiss. "Let her go. She'll come crawling back once she realizes she can't do this alone." I got into my car, set the unsigned agreement on the passenger seat, and drove the 12 miles home with the heat cranked to the max, and my hands shaking on the wheel. That night, I sat at my kitchen table under the light of a single bulb and read every single page again. The document wasn't just a grab for money, it was carefully crafted to make my refusal look like a symptom of my instability. They had attached my childhood academic summaries, and a letter from a school psychologist dated 15 years ago. They had even included a screenshot of me at 14, wearing noise-canceling headphones at Sloane's graduation party. The caption read, "Evidence of ongoing social deficits." I took photos of every page with my phone and uploaded them to a private drive. Then, I went to bed with the lights on, the weight of the coming storm settling into my bones. I took photos of every page with my phone, uploaded them to a secure cloud drive, and went to bed with the lights on. The next morning, I woke to 17 missed calls and a string of texts from my mother that began with, "We can still fix this," and ended with, "You are breaking your father's heart." I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my laptop and began researching the state's guardianship statutes. I printed the forms they would need to file, highlighted the sections regarding clear and convincing evidence of incapacity, and bookmarked every case where an adult had successfully defended their autonomy. I knew they weren't bluffing. And neither was I. The mail carrier knocked on my apartment door in the city just after noon. I signed for a thick, certified envelope from the Mesa County District Court, my hands trembling as I tore it open. 38 pages. Petition for appointment of guardian and conservator. They had gone full nuclear. The allegations were printed in cold, clinical black ink. Maya Thorne is incapacitated by reason of a severe developmental disorder, and is unable to manage her financial affairs or make informed decisions regarding her property. They claimed I could not live independently, that I required 24-hour supervision, and that the $3.6 million trust was at imminent risk of being squandered. Attached were exhibits I had never seen, a psychiatric evaluation dated 6 months earlier, signed by a doctor in Denver whose name I didn't recognize, declaring me nonverbal in stressful situations and incapable of managing assets exceeding $50,000. There were grainy photos of me at 10 years old, wearing a bright blue therapy helmet at a county fair, pulled from some forgotten hard drive. Worst of all was the private post Sloane had made to a local community group 2 days earlier, trying to protect our late grandfather's legacy from someone who simply isn't capable. Prayers appreciated. It had hundreds of shares and nearly 1,000 comments, most of them from strangers offering sympathy to my poor, burdened family. My phone began to blow up with messages from former classmates and neighbors from my childhood. A text from an old coworker read, "Everything okay?" I saw the post. Then, radio silence. 2 days later, HR called me into the regional office in Denver. The long drive felt like a funeral procession. The partner who had personally recruited me 3 years ago wouldn't even look me in the eye as he slid a letter across the desk. "Until this guardianship matter is resolved, we have to place you on unpaid administrative leave," he said. "It's a matter of reputation risk for the firm. You understand?" I understood perfectly. Back in my apartment, I sat on the floor surrounded by the petition pages, spread out like crime scene photos. Every childhood struggle had been weaponized, every therapy note twisted. They had even included a bank statement showing I had once overdrafted by $19 in college, labeling it a pattern of fiscal irresponsibility. Caleb texted once, "Maya, stop making this so hard on everyone." I stared at the screen until it went dark. That night, I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. The walls of my 600-square-foot apartment felt like they were closing in. I stayed up until dawn, scouring state case law. I learned that while guardianships for adults like me were rare, they weren't impossible. The court would require an independent examiner, a medical affidavit, and clear proof that I couldn't handle basic life tasks. I began to compile my own list: rent paid on time for 8 years, a senior auditor title, a perfect driving record, no criminal history. I printed everything. I also learned the stakes. Once a guardianship is granted, the ward loses the right to hire their own attorney, sign contracts, vote, or even decide where to live. The guardian gains total control. My family wanted to lock me in a legal cage and throw away the key. The next morning, I walked the 6 blocks to the courthouse and filed my objection pro se. The clerk raised an eyebrow but stamped the documents. I paid the filing fee with the credit card that still had my name on it for now. Then I drove to the public library and spent 4 hours printing every financial record I had since I turned 18. Every tax return, every lease, every performance review. I built a binder labeled Evidence of Capacity and slid it into my safe. If they wanted to play dirty, I was done being the quiet girl in the corner. I started documenting everything: screenshots of the social media posts, copies of the suspicious psychiatric report, and the emails from HR. I uploaded it all to an encrypted drive only I could access. For the first time since the petition arrived, I felt something sharper than fear. It was anger, clean, focused, ice-cold anger. They thought they could reduce me to a diagnosis on a piece of paper and strip away everything my grandfather had fought to give me. They were about to learn exactly how wrong they were. That same night, sleep remained elusive. I dragged Grandpa Arthur's old metal lockbox out from under my bed, my fingers trembling as I spun the combination he had taught me when I was 12. The lid creaked open, revealing hundreds of numbered envelopes, organized with the meticulous precision he had lived by. Receipts, leases, bank statements, every piece of paper he had ever touched, filed like a library of his life. The box was a sanctuary of organized history, every inch packed with numbered envelopes just as he had left them. Receipts, leases, bank statements, it was a library of a life built on precision. I started with envelope 47, the one labeled Trust Original in his heavy, blocky script. There it was, the full irrevocable trust, executed at a title company in Durango. On page 9, I found the interorum clause, underlined twice in red ink. Any beneficiary who filed suit or attempted to strip another of their share would automatically forfeit their entire interest. The assets would then be redirected to a charitable foundation for neurodiversity support in Colorado. In the margin, my grandfather had scribbled a note: "They'll try, Maya. This protects you." I kept digging. Envelope 112 held something that made my stomach drop. It contained statements from a separate savings account at Mountain West Bank. Over the last 8 months of his life, while he lay in St. Jude's Medical Center in Denver, too weak to even hold a straw, someone had withdrawn exactly $180,000 in 12 separate transactions. Each withdrawal was authorized by. The lockbox was a library of Arthur Sterling's life, organized with a precision that bordered on the obsessive. I started with envelope 47, the one labeled Trust Original in his thick, a durable power of attorney, and bore a signature that was supposed to be his. It wasn't. The loops were too blocky script. There it was, the full irrevocable trust, signed and sealed at a title company in Montrose. Page 9 carried the in terrorem clause, underlined twice in red ink. Any beneficiary who filed suit or attempted to deprive another of their share would automatically forfeit their entire interest, with all assets immediately redirected to a charitable foundation for neurodiversity support. Perfect, the pen pressure too consistent. They were forgeries. I sat back on the carpet, the scattered papers looking in the state. Grandpa had added a handwritten note in the margin, "They'll try, Maya. This protects you." I kept digging. Envelope 112 held something that made my stomach drop, bank statements from a separate savings account Grandpa had kept at Alpine Bank. Over the last 8 months of his life, while he lay in St. like fallen leaves. My mother and Sloane had been the only ones with power of attorney after his stroke. They had drained his personal savings. Mary's hospital in Denver, too weak to even hold a pen. Someone had withdrawn exactly $180,000 in 12 separate transactions. Each withdrawal carried the stamp of a durable power of attorney, and bore signatures that were supposed to be his. They weren't. The loops were too perfect, the pressure too even. They were forged. I sat back on the carpet, papers scattered around me like fallen leaves. My mother and Sloane had been the only ones with power of attorney after his stroke. They had drained his personal savings while he was too weak to fight back, then turned around and claimed I was the one who couldn't handle money. My hands shook so badly I could barely grip my phone. I mess while he was helpless, then had the audacity to claim I was the one who couldn't be trusted with money. Aged Camila Ruiz, a senior auditor I shared a cubicle wall with at the firm in Denver. We had become close. Over my hands shook so violently I could barely grip my phone. I texted Sophia Mendez, a senior auditor I shared a wall, late-night spreadsheets and endless coffee runs. "I need a massive favor," I wrote. "Can with at the firm in Denver." We had become close over late-night spreadsheets and endless carafes of bitter office. "You pull the estate records from the audit file without anyone noticing." She replied almost instantly. "On it. Meet me coffee." "I need a massive favor," I wrote. "Can you pull estate statements tomorrow without raising at the side entrance at 7 a.m.? The next morning, I drove the long stretch to the city before the sun. "Any flags?" She replied almost instantly. "I'm on it. Meet me at the side entrance at 7 a.m. The next morning, I made the 3-hour trek to Denver before the sun had fully cleared the horizon. Camila slipped out of the building in her heavy coat, handed me a flash drive, and whispered, "It's everything from the file they sent us for the tax work last year. I copied the power of attorney withdrawals, too. Just be careful, Maya." I hugged her so hard she let out a nervous laugh. Once fully cleared the peaks. Sophia slipped out of the building in her heavy coat, handed me a flash drive, and spoke in a hurried whisper. "Everything from the estate file they sent for the tax audit last year is on here." I copied home. I overnight the originals and Camila's files to a forensic accountant in Phoenix I had found through the State Society of the POA logs, too. "Just be careful, Maya." I hugged her so hard she let out a startled, nervous laugh. CPAs. His website promised a 48-hour turnaround on fraud cases. I paid the rush fee with the back at my apartment. I overnight the originals and Sophia's files to a forensic accountant in Denver I'd found through the State Society of CPAs. His website promised a 48-hour turnaround on fraud cases. Last credit card I knew was clean. For the next 2 days, I paced my small living room, checking my email every 5 minutes. The apartment smelled of stale coffee and printer ink. I kept replaying my mother's syrupy voice. "Andy paid the rush fee with the last credit card I knew was clean." For the next 2 days, I paced my Marcus Reed's smug countdown in my head. Every notification on my phone felt like another brick piled onto my chest. Small living room, checking my email every 5 minutes. The apartment smelled of stale espresso and printer ink. I kept at 2:13 in the morning. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. It was Caleb. "Maya, I'm freaking out. I have something you need to see. Can we meet tomorrow? Just us." It playing my mother's syrupy voice and Marcus Thorne's smug countdown. Every notification on my phone felt like a fresh stare at the screen. My little brother had barely spoken to me since the reading of the will. He was 19, a freshman at Colorado State, living off the allowance our father still provided. Whatever he had must have been significant if he was risking our mother's wrath this late at night. "The diner on Main Street," I typed back. 9 a.m. "I'll be in the corner booth." I finally collapsed on the couch, the lockbox open beside me like a loyal dog. For the first time since the petition landed, a spark of hope flickered, weighed on my chest. At 2:13 in the morning, my phone buzzed on the counter. It was Caleb. "Maya, I'm freaking out. I have something you need to see. Can we meet tomorrow? Just us." I stared at the screen. My little brother had barely spoken a word to me since the will was read. He was 19, a freshman at the state university, and still entirely dependent on the allowance my father gave him. Whatever it warm or comforting, but cold and sharp. The forensic report arrived the next afternoon, while I was waiting for Caleb, must have been significant if he was risking our parents' wrath this late at night. "The rusty spoon," I typed back. 9 a.m. "I'll be in the corner booth." I finally collapsed. The subject line read, "Preliminary findings, clear evidence of forgery." The doctor's signature on the psychiatric onto the sofa, the lockbox opened beside me like a loyal dog. For the first time since the petition had landed on my doorstep, a spark of hope flickered. It wasn't warm or comforting, it was a cold, sharp-edge evaluation was a digital composite lifted from an old hospital consent form. The letterhead belonged to a clinic that had been shuttered since 2018. Furthermore, the withdrawals from Grandpa's savings account showed identical pen pressure across 12 different dates, an impossible feat for a man on heavy pain medication. I printed everything, 3-hole punched the pages, and slid. The forensic report arrived the following afternoon, while I was waiting for Caleb. The subject line read, "Preliminary findings, evidence of forgery." The doctor's signature on the psychiatric evaluation had been lifted from an old hospital consent form and digitally grafted onto a new document. The letterhead belonged to a clinic that had gone out of business in 201 them into a fresh binder labeled Exhibit B. Caleb walked into the diner 10 minutes late, his hood up and his eyes darting around, as if he expected our mother to emerge from behind the counter. He slid into the booth and pushed 8. Furthermore, the withdrawals from my grandfather's account showed identical pen pressure across 12 different dates, an impossible feat for a man on heavy pain medication. I printed everything, punched holes in the pages, and slid them into a fresh binder labeled a USB drive across the table. "Before you open this," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I didn't know they were going to use my phone. They made me take those old pictures of you with the helmet Exhibit B." Caleb walked into the diner 10 minutes late, his hood up and his eyes darting around as if they told me it was just for family memories. I plugged the drive into my laptop beneath the table. He expected our mother to emerge from the kitchen. He slid into the booth and pushed a USB drive across the table. "Before you open this," he whispered, his voice cracking. I didn't know they were going. Dozens of screenshots appeared, email chains between my mother, Sloane, and Marcus Reed. The subject lines were chilling: how to make the evaluation look official and timing the social media post for maximum sympathy. In one message, dated 3 days after I refused to sign their agreement, Sloane had written, **, if the guardianship goes through, we split the allowance 50, use my phone like that. They told me those old photos of you with the helmet were just for family memories." I plugged the drive into my laptop beneath the table. Dozens of screenshots filled the screen, email chains between my mother 50 after expenses. Caleb gets his tuition covered. Deal, asterisk. My brother's eyes filled with tears. Sloane and Marcus Thorne. The subject lines were damning. How to make the evaluation look official and timing the social media post for maximum sympathy. I scrolled through the digital trail of their conspiracy, the evidence of their. I didn't want any part of this, Maya. I swear. They told me you'd never even notice. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. He squeezed back, looking like the scared 9-year betrayal laid out in stark, glowing pixels. The subject lines were damning. How to make the evaluation look official and timing the social media post for maximum sympathy. One message from Sloane, sent 3 days after I had refused to sign their agreement, laid it all bare. If the guardianship goes through, we split the allowance 50-50 after expenses. Caleb gets his tuition covered. Deal? My brother's eyes filled with tears. I didn't want any part of this, Maya, he whispered. I swear they told me you'd never even notice. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. He squeezed back hard, looking for a moment like the scared 9-year-old who used to hide behind my legs during summer thunderstorms. I paid for his untouched coffee, told him to keep his head down, and promised him we would fix this together. By the time I drove home, the spark of hope in my chest had grown into something steady and fierce. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was preparing to turn their own weapons against them. For the past 3 years, no one in my family had the slightest clue that I was living 2 completely separate lives. Every weekday, I made the long commute into the city, sat through audit meetings, smiled at the appropriate times, and returned home looking like the same quiet, predictable Maya they had always known. But the second my apartment door clicked shut, I became someone else. I would brew a pot of black coffee, lock the deadbolt, and open my laptop to the CPA review courses. For nights a week, sometimes 5, I studied until the numbers blurred into a gray haze. I tackled regulation in the spring, financial accounting in the summer, auditing in the fall, and business concepts over the winter break. While my family posted curated photos of holiday dinners, I was scheduling exams in testing centers miles away, Fort Collins 1 month, Colorado Springs the next, deliberately choosing locations where no one would recognize me. I passed all 4 sections on my first attempt. 6 months ago, the Colorado State Board of Accountancy had mailed me license number 14287. I had framed it and hidden it behind my winter coats in the back of the closet. There had been no party, no announcement, no celebratory dinner. That license was my armor, and I wasn't ready to show it until the moment was perfect. The morning after Caleb handed me the drive, the forensic accountant's final report landed in my inbox. It was 47 pages of damning detail. The psychiatrist's signature on the evaluation had been confirmed as a total digital forgery, lifted from a 2017 hospital discharge summary. The clinic listed as the examiner's office had been out of business for years. The ink analysis on Grandpa's forged withdrawals showed identical pressure patterns across 12 different dates, a physical impossibility for a man whose hands trembled from end-of-life medication. The report concluded with a sentence that made my heart leap: this case presents clear and convincing evidence of fraud on the court and elder financial abuse. I printed 2 copies, one for the judge and one for my safe, and felt my pulse finally slow for the first time in weeks. That afternoon, Caleb texted again, "Can we talk?" Same place. I met him at the small, independent coffee shop near the university campus. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, his hood pulled low over his eyes. He slid another USB drive across the scarred wooden table. "This is everything from Mom's laptop," he said, his voice barely audible. "I cloned the drive while she was in the shower last night. I feel sick doing this, but I can't let them do this to you." I took the drive with steady fingers. "Are you okay, Caleb?" He shook his head. "They keep saying it's for my tuition, or for the ranch mortgage, but it's not. It's just greed. I'm done with them." I reached over and hugged him right there between the mismatched chairs and the smell of roasted beans. He was taller than me now, but he still folded into the hug like a child seeking shelter. For the first time in years, I didn't feel completely alone. Back at my apartment, I plugged in the new drive. It was a treasure trove of malice, hundreds of emails, drafts of the guardianship petition with track changes from Marcus Thorne, and spreadsheets calculating exactly how much monthly care expenses they could justify skimming before the court would raise an eyebrow. There was a group chat titled Project M where Sloane had written, "Once the judge sees the fake evaluation and the wave of sympathy from the community, she'll sign the order in a heartbeat. Then we move the trust assets into the LLC, and we're untouchable." My mother had replied with a thumbs-up emoji. I sat back and let my rage settle into something colder and more useful. Over the next 10 days, I turned my living room into a war room. I organized 3 color-coded binders. The red binder held the fraudulent medical records and the forensic report. The blue binder contained the forged withdrawals and the evidence of power of attorney abuse. The green binder held the emails, the texts, and the full timeline of the conspiracy. I added my CPA license, my last 5 years of tax returns, utility bills in my name, and my lease agreement, everything that proved I had managed my life perfectly well without their protection. I tabbed every page and memorized the state's guardianship statutes until I could quote them in my sleep. I filed a motion for summary judgment, attaching my objection and citing the interorum clause, and requested sanctions for a filing made in bad faith. The clerk at the courthouse accepted the documents without a word, but I saw her eyes widen as she scanned the exhibit list. I was no longer the quiet girl in the corner. I was the storm. Every night, I rehearsed in front of the vanity mirror. There were no dramatic speeches or emotional pleas, only facts delivered flat and fast. I practiced until my voice stopped trembling when I spoke the word forgery. I bought a new charcoal suit at a department store in Denver, the first piece of clothing I had purchased for myself in 5 years. I hung it in the closet right next to the hidden frame of my accounting license. Caleb sent updates from inside the house. My mother was bragging to her friends that the hearing would be an open and shut case, while Sloane was already shopping online for a luxury SUV, convinced the trust was already hers. I saved every screenshot. The calendar on my wall had one date circled in a deep, heavy red. The hearing was 10 days away. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was ready. I woke at 4 in the morning, long before the alarm was set to go off. The apartment was deathly quiet, save for the low hum of the refrigerator. I showered, pulled my hair into a tight, low ponytail, and stepped into the gray suit. No jewelry, no makeup, just the clothes and the evidence. I loaded the 3 color-coded binders and the old metal lockbox into the back seat of my sedan and drove through the empty, pre-dawn streets toward the Mesa County Courthouse. The parking lot held only a few maintenance trucks. I sat in the driver's seat with the engine killed, watching my breath fog the windshield as I rehearsed the timeline one last time. At 8:25, I walked through security, nodded to the clerk who had processed my objection weeks earlier, and took my place at the respondent's table. The gallery filled slowly. My parents and Sloane filed in wearing their Sunday best, their faces tight with a sense of impending victory. Cyrus Halloway adjusted his tie and checked his watch, looking as though he were at a gala rather than a court of law. Caleb slipped in last, sitting 3 rows behind them, and gave me the smallest, most imperceptible nod. The bailiff called the room to order. Judge Margaret Hayes entered, a woman of silver hair and black robes, known for a no-nonsense temperament that could cut through family drama like a bone saw. Case number 2025, DV, 187, in re, the guardianship of Maya Thorne, she announced. Counsel for the petitioners. Cyrus Halloway stood, all smiles. Cyrus Halloway on behalf of the petitioners, Your Honor. And counsel for the respondent. I rose to my feet. Maya Thorne appearing pro se, Your Honor. I filed my formal appearance and my certified public accounting license with the clerk last month. A ripple of movement went through the other side of the room. My mother whispered something sharp to my father. Judge Hayes flipped through the docket, her expression unreadable. I have reviewed the petition, the objection, and the rather voluminous exhibits filed by Ms. Thorne. We will proceed directly to argument. Ms. Thorne, you may begin. I opened the red binder first. Your Honor, the petitioners seek guardianship over an adult with no cognitive impairment. Exhibit A is the original irrevocable trust executed by Arthur Sterling. Page 9 contains the interorum clause, which I have highlighted. It states clearly that any beneficiary who contests another's share forfeits their entire interest. I slid the trust document across the bench. The judge took it, her eyes scanning the text. Exhibit B, I continued, opening the blue binder. This is a forensic accounting report proving that the medical evaluation attached to the petition is a total digital forgery. The psychiatrist's signature is a composite from an old hospital form, and the clinic listed has been closed for 6 years. Cyrus Halloway shot out of his chair. Objection, Your Honor. This is purely speculative. Overruled, the judge said without looking up. Continue, Ms. Thorne. Exhibit C contains bank records showing $180,000 withdrawn from the decedent's personal account under a forged power of attorney, while he was hospitalized and incapacitated. I placed the final green binder on the bench. And Exhibit D includes email and chat logs recovered from the petitioner's own devices, detailing the fabrication of evidence and their explicit intent to divert trust assets into a private LLC for their own personal gain. The courtroom was so quiet I could hear the hitch in my mother's breathing. Judge Hayes spent 20 minutes reading, turning the pages with deliberate, agonizing calm. Halloway tried to interrupt twice more, both times, she raised a single hand, and he was forced to sit. Finally, she removed her glasses and looked directly at the petitioner's table. Mr. Halloway, she said, her voice like grinding stone. Do your clients have any explanation for forged medical records, forged signatures on financial documents, or digital discussions about manufacturing evidence to mislead this court? Halloway opened his mouth, closed it, and then opened it again. Your Honor, this appears to be a deeply unfortunate family misunderstanding. There is no misunderstanding, the judge cut in. There is clear and convincing evidence of fraud on this court. She turned her gaze to my mother, my father, and Sloane. Do any of you wish to explain these documents? Dead silence followed. Sloane stared at the floor. My father's face had gone a sickly shade of gray. My mother's lips trembled but no sound came out. Judge Hayes picked up her gavel. By the express terms of the interorum clause in the Arthur Sterling Irrevocable Trust, the petitioners have forfeited all beneficial interest in the estate. The petition for guardianship is denied and dismissed with prejudice. All trust assets shall remain solely under the control of Maya Thorne. Furthermore, the petitioners are jointly and severally liable for the respondent's court costs, and a civil sanction of $25,000 for filing in bad faith. The gavel cracked once, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Cyrus Halloway slumped into his chair, as if his spine had been removed. Sloane let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. My mother covered her face with her hands, while my father simply stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched so tight I thought it might shatter. I stood perfectly still as the clerk handed me the signed order. My hands did not shake. My voice did not crack. The judge looked at me one last time. Miss Thorne, you are free to go. Good luck. The gavel fell with a finality that echoed through the silent room. Marcus Reed slumped into his chair, as if the air had been kicked out of him. Sloane let out a sound somewhere between a gasp and a sob, while my mother covered her face with trembling hands. My father just stared ahead, his jaw clenched so tightly I thought it might shatter. I stood perfectly still as the clerk handed me the signed order. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't crack. The judge looked at me one last time, her expression softening just a fraction. Miss Thorne, you are free to go. Good luck. I gathered my binders, gave a short nod to Caleb, and walked out of the courtroom without looking back. Outside, the sun had risen over the Grand Mesa, bright, cold, and entirely indifferent to the wreckage I had left behind. Justice tasted exactly as Grandpa Arthur said it would, quiet, final, and earned. The consequences arrived 30 days later, one by one, silent and merciless. First came the certified letter regarding the foreclosure on my parents' estate. It turned out they had taken out a massive reverse mortgage years ago, betting that the equity would hold until they could replenish their accounts with my trust money. Without it, the bank called the note. The house was set for auction by spring. Sloane's world collapsed even faster. Her husband filed for divorce the following week, when he discovered the true extent of their debt, 6 figures in credit cards used for luxury cars, designer wardrobes, and a kitchen remodel that neither of them could afford. He walked away with his truck and his credit score, leaving her with the bills. She moved into a cramped one-bedroom rental and took a job as a receptionist at a local clinic. Caleb sent me an email mid-semester. His tuition payment had bounced. My father had pulled the plug on his education as soon as the court case ended. My brother dropped out of the state university, packed his truck, and took a job as a ranch hand 30 miles outside of town, working for $10 an hour and a bed in a bunkhouse. Every Sunday night, a new text would appear on my phone, "I'm sorry, Maya." I read them all, but I never replied. The $3.6 million from the trust was transferred into the Sterling Neurodiversity Foundation the day the judge signed the final decree. I filed the paperwork myself and stepped in as the executive director. The mission was exactly what Grandpa would have wanted, providing scholarships and mentorship for neurodiverse adults pursuing careers in finance and law. The first recipients were already enrolled in community college programs, supported by stipends that didn't come with lectures about what they were or weren't capable of doing. I bought a modest 2-bedroom Craftsman on a quiet street with a wraparound porch. On the day I moved in, I hung Grandpa's old leather ledger on the wall above my desk. My new shingle went up the following Monday, Maya Thorne, CPA, Fiduciary Advocacy and Forensic Accounting. My very first client was a young man from the northern part of the state whose family had tried the exact same guardianship play. We broke their case in 42 days. My mother eventually sent an email with a blank subject line. "Maya, your father and I were wrong," it read. "We let fear and greed get the better of us. I know I don't deserve it, but if there's any way you could find it in your heart to forgive me." I read it twice in the quiet of my office. I moved the cursor over the reply button, hesitated for a second, and then dragged the message into the trash. I emptied the folder. Caleb's last message came on a Thursday night. It was just a photo attachment, a picture of Grandpa Arthur leaning against his old red truck, squinting into the sun with his arm around a 12-year-old me. I was holding a ledger as if it were made of solid gold. Underneath, he wrote 4 words, "I'm sorry, Maya. Truly." I saved the photo to my phone, set it as my lock screen for exactly 30 seconds, and then blocked his number. I didn't hate them. Hate takes an amount of energy I no longer had to spare. Forgiveness wasn't something I owed them, it was a gift they had spent every chance to earn long ago. Some mornings, I drive out to the ranch. It's leased now to a young couple who send me perfect quarterly reports and meticulous checks. I walk the same fence lines Grandpa taught me to read, feeling the same wind that used to whip through his hair. I know exactly what he'd say if he could see me standing there. He'd tip his hat, give me that slow grin, and tell me I'd done good. That's enough for me. I still get calls from people across the state, quiet voices asking if it's really possible to fight your own blood and win. I always give them the same answer. Yes. And you won't be alone. The little girl who used to line up toy trucks by weight grew up to build something much bigger than revenge. She built proof. Proof that the world will try to convince you that you are less than you are. But if you keep the receipts, literal and figurative, one day you get to hand them back and watch the whole story change. Grandpa was right. I could. And I did.